Hi, I'm Michael Wildenstein, and today I'm going to talk about the equine conformation. Equine conformation. Any textbook that you look at on equine lameness has a chapter on conformation. Unfortunately, we kind of neglect that today. The issue with equine conformation, as Dr. Stashak says in his veterinary text, that it's a very sensitive subject. Meaning every day when I go out and give clinics, I'm upsetting somebody because they take my analysis of their equine's conformation personally. Note that all horses have conformational deviations just as we do. We need to use those conformational deviations to help us define what we're going to do with hoof care. Possibly it will concern lameness and all kinds of other issues that the horse may have over time because of the conformation. So understanding the conformation can help us keep the horse going, help the horse do the best of its ability with what it has, and not compromise the horse even more. The thing that I like to do is establish a routine as to how I look at the horse's conformation. I suggest you do the same. So first off, I want to define what's the dominant limbs. What are the dominant limbs? And I'm going to use musculature. And note that all of this is opinion. It's an art. It takes a long time of study to look at the horse's equine conformation, and it changes with how you move the horse or how the horse is standing. Just like my conformation will change when I walk around or stand differently, it'll look differently. So the more perspectives that you can get, the better it'll be. So your reality is your last perspective. Make sure you get lots of perspectives before you start defining the conformation. This specimen, the horse died for other reasons, not so we had a specimen, but Walter Valco did a beautiful job in putting this together. And when you look at any specimen, you can see that there's angulation. There's a difference in the length of the bone from inside to outside. You can see that there's a slight twist in here. When I move this condylar joint, you can see that from the fetlock, that limb is going in. And on this one, you can see that the pastern goes out slightly again, and you can see that the coffin joint, it goes in again. All of the horses have a variance in length of bone, twists in the bone. Every tissue is going to change according to the stresses applied upon them. The shape of the bone will change. The density of bone from one side to another will change over time. Our goal is to make the stresses as uniform as possible, to have uniformity in stresses and in density of the bones and strength of tissues. So when I walk around the horse, I want to look at the front end first. And this May is a Haflinger. A Haflinger is a very versatile breed from Austria. Can pull a plow, can pull a carriage, can take you to church on Sunday. And it's easy to look over them. And so what I'm going to do is just see if I can ask her to square up here. You want to be familiar with the horse before you start doing this. Look at the withers. And I'm looking at the withers right here. And I'm looking at how full the withers are up here. And if you look straight down the back line, and we'll watch how she holds her head, because they're going to have a dominant head tilt also, right, left, or maybe even center. She's on cross ties, throat, so that's not popular. But I'm seeing a disparity up here, right? See how full she is here, less full here. I'm going to see if I can move her leg slightly and get her equally weight bearing, look at it again, and still there's a dominance over here. Not unusual. My right arm is bigger than my left arm because I'm right dominant. Now, horses can be dominant on one side or another too, but I want to verify if that continues. So I can feel things that I can't see. I'm going to feel the muscling, and I'm going to go right down into the scapular region and see if it's still dominant there. I'm going to step back and get another perspective. I'm going to look from a different angle, and judge what disparities I see. And when I follow down through, I'm noticing even through the scapular region and down into the shoulder, left is a little bit stronger. Then I'm going to go down into the shoulder, right into here. I'm going to get a personal. And use the same hand, because your other hand is going to tell you a story that's not the same as your dominant hand. So feel the muscles, feel. And you can feel the difference in how she is muscled as you go down through there. And they aren't all consistent. Some may have less muscling up on top, but more muscling down on bottom. So look at the muscling. And so I'm establishing a dominance. And there's ways that I can verify that. Because the hoof capsule is soft tissue, it's deformable. It will deform according to the stresses applied upon it. So when I'm thinking about which limb is dominant, the dominant side is going to have the greater size of the hoof. So I'll look down. Just think about cutting the hoof off right at the hairline like a dinner plate, and look at the size of it. Feel the size of it. Feel across there. Is there a disparity in size? It's going to tell you a little bit about what's going on. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the angle of the hairline from the side. So if I put a straight edge on there, I'll put the straight edge on that hairline and just look at where it points. And then compare it to the lateral or outside of the other one, one slightly flatter. So look at the shape of that hairline. How is the angle of the hairline? And then look at the angle of the heels. The angle of the heel. How much angle is there on this heel compared to the angle on this heel? So the heel with the greatest slope, as a guideline, is going to be the heel that's being extended out, working harder than the other one. The hoof with the more slope to the hairline is going to be your dominant hoof. There's going to be a difference in the gait. That hoof is going to be deformed at the time of greatest stress. Take that information that you saw, go back and see if when you go down through there, you get the same exact thing, the same exact perspective. Is it the same or is it different? And as I follow down through, I'm seeing a little disparity in them, but it's not much. It's so subtle, it's hard to define. And if it's so subtle that it's hard to define, it's not an issue. If there's a great disparity, it is an issue. The next thing we could do is watch the horse go and listen to the horse go, because you'll note a difference in the sound as those hooves hit the ground. That will also give you information. So I am noticing that on the left front, the dominance follows all the way down through into the hoof capsule. I'm noticing a difference in heel angle. I'm noticing a difference in hairline angle. I'm noticing a slight difference in the hoof head dimension, the top of the hoof dimension. So I'm confident, and this is opinion, that the left fore is this horse's dominant limb. No problem. But it is a piece of information that we can use when we're working on the horse. I'm going to stick to the front end because it gets too confusing if we go back and forth to the hind end of the animal right now. But I'm going to look at her front limbs and I'm going to look for angular deviations. And angular deviations are a bend, as seen from the front or the back of the animal. An angular, a bend. And so when I come up in front, I'm going to get one perspective of her, and I'm going to start with one limb. The left is my favorite right now, so I'm going to follow my eyes down through the limb. And if you look from straight in the front, I'm looking for an angle. I'm going to start, this is the radius, the carpus or the knee, and the cannon bone or metacarpal. I'm looking for an angle. What is the angle? Where is the knee compared to the rest of the limb? And so the radius comes down here. The cannon bone comes out here. The knee is slightly towards the inside. Slightly towards the inside. That's my perspective right now. And that may change according to how she's weight bearing or how she's standing. She seems to be standing pretty square right now. And then I follow down to the fetlock, and I'm looking at the fetlock. I feel her angular deviation is slightly varus from the fetlock. So slightly valgus out from the knee, varus in at the fetlock. And then the ones that confuse us are the small bones, like the short pastern right here, which is only about 1.5 inches, and then the coffin joint. And those are so important because as a hoof care provider, we have so much influence on them. So I feel that the fetlock goes in, pastern goes out, and the coffin joint goes in. But I want to verify every perspective that I have. And so I want to get a different view of it. I may pull the limb out like this and look down. And here I can see that from the knee, well, now that cannon bone doesn't look so much the same. It looks like it's actually going in this perspective. Then it goes in strong at the fetlock, slightly out at the pastern, and then it looks like it goes in. So let's get another perspective. I'm going to flex this limb, go behind. When I do this, I want the horse's limb to be in the normal range of motion, wherever she's comfortable. It's not out here. It's in the normal range where it's very relaxed. And from here, I can see that from the knee, The cannon bone actually does go in slightly, so that's a varus. From the fetlock, it goes in. The pastern, and if you look at the little bit of hair here, you can see an angulation out in the short pastern. And then from this perspective, the foot actually goes out again. So that's a valgus deviation. And so several perspectives. With an angular deviation, that's a bend as seen from the front or the hind, the hoof will distort from side to side. So a dominant angular deviation, you look for distortion of the hoof from side to side. So when I come up here, I'm looking at the hoof, and I'm looking at the angle of the side of the hoof. The angle of the side of the hoof. So what is the angle? How is the slope there? This has a lot of slope right in the pillar or that toe quarter. This side has slightly less slope. That's one perspective. I'll get over it and look down. I'll step behind the horse and look at the hoof there. I'll step in front of the animal and look there. And I'm seeing this slope here. With an angular deviation, the hoof will distort from side to side. And this hoof, at this point, appears to be distorting to the inside. It's telling me that throughout the limb, the varus deviations, the deviations where the limb is going in, are greater than the valgus, deviations where the limb is going out. And so when I'm looking at that, this perspective may change when the horse is trimmed, but at this point, for the angular deviations, I feel in order to change her posture, I'm going to have to add width to the lateral branch or outside branch of that shoe in order to change her posture slightly, to give her foot more even stresses through it. We know that all cells need a certain amount of stress. Too much stress and we destroy them. Too little stress and they atrophy or get smaller. So our hope is that we can give them more uniform stress to the hoof wall, to the coronary corium where the hoof grows from, or the corium of the wall, the laminae, and the solar corium to help them out, to allow that hoof to grow in a more even manner and to change the stresses throughout that limb. When I'm done with the angular deviations, I want to look at rotational deviations. And rotational deviations are twists in the limb, a twist. And what I do is run my hand down there and I can feel where that knee is going. Run my hand down further, I can feel where that fetlock is going. Follow down through the pastern and the hoof, and we have two different rotations down there. All of this is so normal. It's not out of normalcy for the conformation of the horse, but it does have an impact of the hoof. I'll stand in front of the limb and look down through the limb. I'll walk in front of the knee, step in front of the fetlock, step in front of the foot, and I can see that there's several rotations down through the limb at this stance right now. I'll pull the limb forward in the natural range of motion and look down through there, and I can see that there's some twists. We simplify it by toeing in or toeing out, but those rotational deviations create a lot of stresses within the joints, twisting of the limbs, and it's important to note where they are, whether they're in a joint, whether they're in a long bone. You can see that twist right there in the cannon bone, and then it's hard to tell just where it is in the long pastern here, but it goes out again, and then it goes in again down in the short pastern, coffin joint. And we know that joints like the fetlock that have a large condylar ridge, they go straight in line. They don't have much movement this way, whereas the coffin joint is more like a ball joint that can go in any direction. That'll move around quite a bit. All important information. And with rotational deviations, with a rotational deviation, a twist in the limb, or several twists in the limb, the hoof will show deformation on a diagonal with a dominant rotational deviation, with a dominant twist on a diagonal. So when I'm looking for that diagonal, I'm thinking about the hoof. I'm going to split it into four pieces, right down the middle, and then in halves. Split it into four pieces. And so when I'm looking at the toe quarters, right, the toe quarters, which is the biggest piece of pie? Which is the biggest corner? I see the biggest corner out here. That's medial or inside toe quarter. When I step behind the horse, I'll look at the bulbs of the heels and look at the symmetry of the bulbs of the heels. Look at where the quarter bend is. Where does that quarter bend start? Where does the heel start turning in? It should start turning in normally at about the fourth nail hole on your factory-made shoe. And if it curves in further forward, that means that heel is compressed or pushed in because of the rotational deviation, a disparity in heel landing or disparity in the heels. One heel will help you define that there is a dominant rotational deviation and that there's possibly something we could do with the shoe to help that horse out. The bulges of the heels are very important for reducing the concussion and absorbing that and dissipating it as that horse's foot lands. It's very important that they're full and they're working in a uniform manner. And by changing the posture slightly, we can make a difference on that. The next thing I want to do is come behind the horse and watch the ear gut, watch the fetlock. Where does that fetlock fall through the back of the hoof? And if I get right down here and get straight behind that hoof, straight behind the hoof in the direction of the hoof is pointing, then I lift the contralateral limb, the opposite limb, watch that fetlock. You stay over there and watch this one, watch that fetlock. And how does that fetlock drop? I want to watch, where does that drop, towards the inside or outside? Optimally, we want it to fall right down through the middle of the foot, right through the central sulcus there. But right now, I feel that it's falling off to one side. And I feel that it's dropping just slightly outside, lateral side, which would also go along with the fact that the horse has a strong rotational deviation and the limb is slightly twisted. The heel quarter is bent in from horizontal stresses because of those rotational deviations. So where the ear gut falls or where the fetlock falls is helpful in defining what we need to do to help this horse out with our modifications to our shoe and with our trim to get that posture more even, to get that landing of the heels more even. Never going to get it exact, but our goal is to get it somewhat better. Rotational deviation, that's a twist in the limb, or many twists in the limb. And they can be axial, that's towards the inside, toed in, or abaxial, that's towards the outside, abaxial. And rotational deviations will show a diagonal deformation of the hoof. That's a major rotational, or your dominant rotation. Which direction that limb is twisting is going to show a dominant diagonal deformation of the hoof. The next thing I'd like to go over is flexural deviations. And flexural deviations are angles as seen from the side. And when you're looking at the angles as seen from the side, you want to be directly alongside of the animal. And when I go down through there, I'm looking for angles as seen from the side. And with this stance right here, I feel that the cannon bone is going slightly forward at the bottom. If I put a dot in there and a dot in there, where is the bottom dot, forward or back? And right now it's slightly forward. Well, I want to see if that stays the same when I ask the horse to bear full weight bearing. And it doesn't. It doesn't. It's not back at the knee. She's actually quite straight, if anything, just slightly over, but not much. And that's very important to look at it when they're fully weight bearing. The next thing I want to judge is the hoof pastern axis. The hoof pastern axis is what's the angle of the pastern compared to the hoof. And when I go down through there with the straight edge, I have a guideline for defining that. I want the straight edge to be alongside of the hoof, and I want to see just a little bit of hair in the front there, and I'll put the bottom at the same angle. Don't look at the hoof now, but look at the angle of the pastern. And then I want to lift the other limb and watch what happens with the fetlock. See the fetlock drop? All of a sudden, that changed it completely. It's so important to judge the hoof pastern axis when the animal is totally weight bearing. This one's going to be different than that one. Judge them when they're totally weight bearing. And if you're going to judge hoof pastern axis using other equipment like a radiograph, I also suggest that you try it fully weight bearing. It's going to have a very different outcome. Your perspective is going to change immediately. A horse with a deformation, a flexural deformation in the limb, is going to show a deformation of the hoof from front to back. If we know that the whole hoof is connected, everything in that hoof is connected, nothing works independently. If the heels move forward, the toe's going to move forward. If the toe moves back, the heels are going to move back. Everything's connected. If you have a diagonal stress, the opposite diagonal is going to move one way or another. Side-to-side stress, the whole side is going to move. So looking at the stresses in the hoof wall is very important. Also, look at the lines or the rings. And if you look across there, I can feel those rings. Those rings are going to tell you a lot about the stresses that are in that hoof wall. Are they even? And not all horses are going to have these stresses, but if they are there, you can tell a lot about it. You see the disparity in the stresses. We know that if we trim too much off of the hoof for a week or two after the trimming process, there will be less growth in the hoof wall because we've created too much stress to that hoof. We've taken off the natural protective layers so that the circulation is cut back and they don't grow as well. And then they'll get growing again, and towards the end of the trimming cycle or the hoof care cycle, they'll be growing pretty good. So what we want to do is take somewhat less material, leave some of that protection, or put it back when we apply some protective device to the hoof. If we have these rings that are really pressed together tight, think about vertical stress. Look at the hairline. The hairline is telling you about stresses in there. And are these lines going the same way? If you look right here, there's a bow in there. And that bow corresponds with a bow right up in here. The heel may have been too far forward and it's putting a vertical stress and pushing that hairline up. Just another guideline to help you define what's going on. If we're going to apply shoes, we want to apply those shoes to where the horse is the most comfortable. And the horse is going to tell us a lot if we take time to listen to the horse. So we've gone through angular deviations, which are bends as seen from the front or the back. We've gone through rotational deviations, which are twists in the limb, as seen from the front or the back. And we've gone through flexural deviations, which are angles as seen from the side. And when I'm thinking about these angles or twists, I also want to think about the stresses that are applied to the animal. So as a farrier, my discipline, shoeing horses, I spend most of the day with a hoof between my legs. And so I have a bend in my knees, and you think about what's happening to the tissues. I have compression of the inside of the joint, compression. So I'm susceptible to skeletal lesions on the inside of my knees. I'm susceptible to soft tissue lesions because the soft tissues are elongated on the outside of the knee in order to stand this way. On my back, I have the same issue. I'm elongating the soft tissue on my back and I'm compressing the vertebrae on the inside. And because of my discipline, I'm going to be susceptible to certain pathologies or damages, arthritis, because of what I do. I'm also susceptible to certain pathologies because of my conformation. How do I walk? How's it go? I want to buck up and buy some new shoes because I tend to wear the outside heel. And as I wear the outside heel, I'm going to walk more normal. And or closer together, base narrow. And as I walk more base narrow, I'm going to wear harder on the outside. And over time, that's going to create more compression on the inside. And to alleviate that compression on the inside and the elongation of soft tissue, I need to buck up and buy some new boots, or I need to get them resoled so I have that even. And that's what we want to do for our horses. Horse's hoof takes about 9 months to a year, depending on environment, exercise, nutrition, genetics, and many other factors. But it takes 9 months to a year to totally replace itself. And so it's always changing. It's changing with the environment. It's changing with the amount of exercise. It's changing with the nutrition that changes throughout the year. It's going to be constant changes. What I do today is not necessarily what I'm going to do in 4 weeks. And I say 4 weeks because it's very important to have your hoof care schedule on a 4-week schedule. 4 weeks, because after 4 weeks, research shows us that hoof angles change by at least 2 degrees. And depending on which paper you read, with every degree that changes, it changes the stresses to the soft tissues by 4 to 7%. And so if you think about going 6 or 8 weeks, you're increasing the stresses to the soft tissues, some soft tissues, and decreasing it on others. But you're changing that significantly. It doesn't take long to get a 24% difference in the stresses to that hoof wall and all the associated tissues. So keeping your horse on a 4-week schedule will make a remarkable difference, because if you're going 6 or 8 weeks, the farrier, the hoof care provider, is never going to be able to catch up because there's too much deformation, there's too much stress, too much compression on one side, too much elongation on another. You can't catch up. It's important to keep that short shoeing trimming cycle.